The land shimmered under a silver sky. It was the season of change near the Okavango Delta, when the rains came not with fury but with grace. Puddles gathered in hollows, and grass began to rise from the earth like a promise. The air smelled of damp soil, fresh leaves, and the distant tension of thunder yet to arrive. Aurora stood at the top of a termite mound, her golden eyes sweeping the plain. Her coat, sleek from the recent rains, glistened under the muted sun. As the matriarch of her pride, she had survived droughts, floods, and the ambitions of wandering males. Intelligence ruled her more than muscle. She fought only when needed, and led always with purpose. Below her, Nala and Zuri dozed in the tall grass, bellies full from a kill made the night before. Kaya kept watch near the cubs, her ears flicking at flies, her muscles always taut. They trusted Aurora with their lives. She trusted them with the pride. Then the wind changed. Aurora lifted her head. Something unfamiliar rode the breeze, blood, dust, and lion. But not one of them. Not one of theirs. From the edge of the mopani trees, a figure emerged. He moved like mist, silent, slow, but not weak. Each step was deliberate, though his body swayed with pain. His coat was not tawny like most lions. It was pale, almost white, streaked with mud and blood. Scars marked his flanks. A deep gash split his shoulder. One eye was half closed. His ribs showed through his side. Yet there was power in him. Not in the way of dominance, but dignity. He did not crouch. He did not snarl. He walked like he knew he had no territory, no pride, and no right to ask, but still. He came. Aurora stepped down from the mound. The others noticed. Kaya rose, growling low. Zuri stood, lips pulled back slightly, tense. But Aurora lifted her tail. Wait. The pale lion stopped 20 paces away. He said nothing. He did not roar. He simply stood in the open, breathing hard, eyes steady on Aurora. A moment passed, long, quiet, waited with instinct. And in that moment, Aurora saw everything. The blood on his leg was not fresh. It was from defending something. Or someone. Maybe prey he could not finish. The limp was real, the hunger even more so. Yet he hadn't crept up. Hadn't tried to steal. He had approached not as a threat, but a request. She walked forward. 5 paces. Then 3. Then 1. They stood nearly nose to nose now. Aurora sniffed the air around him. Caught the scent of hyena on his fur. Old blood. Rain. She looked into his eyes, one bright, one clouded, and saw no challenge there. Only pain. Only pride. She did not speak. Of course. But lions have language beyond sound. She stepped aside. A gesture, you may stay. But at a distance. Ghost, if that was even his name. If lions had names, dipped his head slightly. Then, limping, he moved toward a fallen marula tree at the edge of their clearing and lay down. Not too close, not too far. The other lionesses watched, still unsure. He's wounded, Nala said. And a male, Kaya added sharply. He could turn. Not tonight, Aurora replied. They said no more. That night, the rain came, not hard, just enough to clean the leaves and soften the soil. Ghost lay curled under the marula, breathing shallow, never taking his eyes off the pride. He made no move toward the kill they had dragged into the shade. He did not eat. Aurora watched him from a distance. The storm passed. In the early hours, Before sunrise, Aurora walked over to the carcass, tore off a strip of flank meat, and carried it across the clearing. She dropped it in front of Ghost. He did not look at her, but he ate, slowly, carefully. The Pride watched. None interrupted. The next day, Ghost slept. Deep, unmoving sleep, the kind that only the near-broken take when they finally feel safe. Aurora stood watch longer than usual. There was something in him, an old strength. Worn down but not gone. Something in the way he endured the wound. The hunger, the solitude. She understood it. She had led this pride through fire and famine. She had buried cubs and fought off coalitions. She knew what it meant to keep walking after loss. And so, she let him stay. Days passed. The wound began to close. Ghost did not speak, but his eyes followed the cubs when they played. He moved slowly when the lionesses hunted, never chasing, never interfering. He kept his place. One evening, Zuri brought him water in her jaws, carried in a hollowed gourd left by humans near the edge of the delta. She said nothing, but she placed it near him. He drank. Even Kaya stopped growling by the 5th day. He was still a stranger, but no longer a threat. And when the rains thickened and the prey grew more abundant, Aurora climbed her mound again, and saw Ghost lying under the tree. Stronger now, head lifted. Not a member of the Pride. Not yet, but something more than a shadow. Something like kin. In the wild, survival was not always strength. Sometimes, survival was recognition, and respect, and a single chance, offered without words. A place to rest, even for a ghost. The rain had returned, heavier now, falling in sheets that turned the land to slick mud and carved rivulets down every slope. The sky hung low and gray, rumbling with distant thunder. Water pooled in the lowlands and soaked into the earth. But no life stirred with joy. The Pride kept to higher ground, restless and damp, huddled under trees that barely kept the cold off their backs. Ghost had drifted further from the Pride each day. At first, it was small, choosing a rock farther from the others, not rising to follow on hunts, sleeping too long even after sunrise. His wounds had closed, but the strength never came back. He refused food when Nala brought scraps. He drank little. His ribs showed again. By the 2nd week of rains, he no longer rose when the Pride moved. He lay near the edge of a cliff, where the ground dipped sharply and a narrow crack split the rock like a warning. The others avoided it, but Ghost chose it, seeking solitude or surrender. Aurora didn't know. She watched him from a distance. There was no fight in him now. Just silence. Then, one night, the rain turned violent. The wind howled across the plain, flattening grass and rattling tree limbs. Water pounded the earth, and thunder cracked the sky wide open. The Pride curled together under an overhang, tight and quiet, listening to the storm roll through. Aurora couldn't sleep. She lifted her head, scanned the dark beyond the trees, and found the cliff in the distance, barely visible. But enough. She didn't see Ghost. A sick feeling twisted in her gut. She stood. Nala stirred beside her. What is it? He's not there, Aurora said. The two lionesses moved out into the rain, claws slipping on the wet ground. Lightning lit the landscape in brief flashes, ghostly and pale. The air was thick with the smell of wet stone and soaked earth. They reached the cliff. The ground near the crack was darker, muddy, disturbed. Aurora sniffed. Her body went tense. Then they heard it. A sound, faint, broken, a growl, but weaker than any lion's roar should be. Ghost, Nala called softly. Another flash of lightning lit the crevice. Aurora rushed forward. There, wedged between two massive slabs of stone, lay Ghost. His body was twisted awkwardly. One leg pinned beneath him. The narrow crack had widened slightly. Enough to catch him in its grip but not enough for escape. He had fallen during the rain. Maybe the ground gave way. Maybe his strength finally did. Either way, he was trapped. And he was alive. But barely. His eyes blinked slowly through the downpour. His chest rose and fell in short, shallow breaths. Blood dripped from his flank where sharp stone had torn him open again. Aurora let out a roar. It echoed off the cliffs and across the wet plains, sharp, commanding, full of urgency. Nala joined her, calling into the night. Over and over, they roared, not out of panic, but to summon the pride, to summon help. Minutes passed. Then Kaya arrived. Then Zuri. They circled the crevice, tried to find an angle, a way down, but the walls were steep and slick, and Ghost was lodged tight between the rocks. Aurora growled, frustrated. She leapt down a small ledge, tried to push at one of the stones, but it didn't budge. Below, Ghost's paw twitched. He let out a low, pained sound. They couldn't pull him. They couldn't climb down fully without risking a second fall. They were trapped above, and he was trapped below. Aurora stood over the edge and roared again. Longer this time. The rain drowned most sound. But her voice broke through. It filled the valley, a raw sound of command, of defiance. Kaya tried scraping at the earth above, using her claws to dig away the edge. Mud crumbled under her paws, but the rock beneath stayed firm. Zuri ran back for a branch, anything to wedge in, to shift the stone. All night they worked, all night they called, and Ghost, though he faded, never once looked away from the sky. He saw them, he heard them, and in those hours of pain and darkness, he was not alone. He was part of the pride. At dawn, the rain stopped. The clouds broke apart in streaks of gold and blue. The earth steamed as the sun touched it again. Aurora sat at the edge of the cliff, exhausted but unmoving. She looked down at Ghost, still breathing, still caught between the stones. She didn't leave. None of them did. And down below, Ghost's eye opened once more. Not pleading, not afraid, just grateful. The fall had broken his body, but not the bond. The sky had cleared, but the scent of rain still clung to the air. The savannah shimmered under the morning sun, the wet earth steaming gently. Birds called from the trees. The world was waking, but something was wrong. At the edge of the Okavango Wildlife Station, a cluster of lionesses appeared, pacing slowly in the open, too close to human territory, too deliberate to be chance. Ethan adjusted his binoculars. He was the only ranger on morning duty. The others had gone to check the northern fence line. It was supposed to be a quiet day, routine checks, some light tracking, maybe logging the elephant herds passing through the western corridor. But this was not routine. He stepped onto the porch of the ranger hut, boots splashing in the damp soil, eyes locked on the 4 lionesses circling in the grass beyond the outer fence. They weren't attacking, weren't hunting, they were calling, low, resonant roars, not meant to threaten, but to announce, "We are here, look at us, follow us." They moved with purpose, circling the area again and again, pausing at times to glance toward the trees, toward the direction of the cliffs. The lead lioness, tall, regal, golden-eyed, stared straight at him. Aurora. He'd seen her once before. From afar, a matriarch of one of the region's most stable prides. Intelligent, watchful, unshakable, but she'd never come this close. None of them had. And now, here they were. Ethan felt something twist in his chest, not fear, not confusion, recognition. Something had happened. Aurora took a step forward. She didn't snarl, didn't crouch. She just looked at him, long and hard, then turned her head toward the trees. She roared once, deep, long, and looked back. Then started walking, away from the station, slow, deliberate. The other lionesses followed her. Ethan stood frozen. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't training. It was something else. A message. Follow me. He grabbed his radio, but there was no signal this deep. Didn't matter. He grabbed his tranquilizer rifle. Just in case. Slung on his satchel with water and a basic medkit. And set out on foot. Boots squelching in the wet grass. He followed them. They never broke stride. They didn't look back. But they didn't run either. They led him, through shallow water. Over ridges slick with moss. Past half-flooded termite mounds. It took nearly half an hour. And then he heard it. A sound like nothing else. A lion's groan, long, low, painful, not from fear, from suffering. He broke into a jog, pushed through a line of brush, and stopped dead. Below him, nestled between two massive rocks at the base of a narrow cliff, was a lion, white, his breath shallow, eyes glazed, a deep gash across his shoulder. Ghost. Ethan knelt, stunned. He'd heard whispers from trackers about a pale male spotted alone weeks ago. No one had confirmed it. No photos. Just legend. Now he was here. Real. Broken. And still alive. Aurora moved to the edge. Looked down. Then turned to Ethan. No sound. Just a look. Do something. Ethan dropped his bag, pulled out a flashlight and leaned closer to assess. Ghost was wedged tightly between the rocks. One leg pinned, one side cut and bruised. His ribs moved, shallow but steady. Ethan exhaled. You poor bastard. He radioed in, voice steady. Station. This is Ethan. I've found a lion, adult male. White coat. Pinned in a rock crevice near Sector 9. Still alive. I need backup. Stretcher gear. A lift jack. And the vet unit. This is priority 1. Over. The response crackled. Copy that. On our way. He looked up. Aurora hadn't moved. She watched him work, silent and fierce. The other lionesses lay nearby now. Calm. Patient. They trusted him. Ethan felt the weight of it, of being the only bridge between wild instinct and human help. He pulled a thermal blanket from his kit and draped it gently over Ghost's exposed side. The lion didn't resist, didn't even flinch, but his eye opened, barely, and for a breath, Ethan thought he saw the same thing Aurora had shown him. Not a threat. Not a wild beast. A soul asking not to be left behind. He sat beside him, hand resting on the rock. I've got you, Ethan whispered. They called. I came. And above them, the lionesses stood watch. Silent sentinels in the rising sun. The sun rose higher, casting long golden beams across the soaked plains. Birds called in the distance. And the wind carried the smell of wet bark and disturbed soil. but in a quiet pocket of the wilderness, time seemed to hold its breath. Ghost lay wedged deep between two massive slabs of stone, his white fur stained with blood, mud, and rain. His breaths were shallow, chest rising with effort, eyes half-lidded and dull. The weight of pain and fatigue pressed down on him like the very rock that trapped his leg. Aurora sat close by, silent and alert. She didn't pace. She didn't roar again. Instead, she remained still, a sentinel at the edge of his suffering. Occasionally, she let out a low, steady rumble, not aggressive, not panicked, a voice meant only for him. "I'm here. You're not alone." The pride had gathered quietly, keeping their distance but never leaving sight. Even Kaya, so often skeptical, sat near the brush, watching with narrowed eyes and a steady breath. And then, the sound of engines. Dust kicked up in the distance as the rescue convoy arrived, 3 trucks loaded with gear, ropes, a stretcher rig, and the field vet's mobile station. At their center stood Ethan, now changed into dry gear, his rifle slung behind him, face grim and focused. He jumped out first and led the team directly to the crevice. Aurora turned her head to watch. She didn't run, she didn't growl, she stepped aside. A gesture of trust. Ethan paused at her side for a moment and met her gaze. "Thank you," he said, quietly. Then he climbed down to the edge of the crevice where Ghost lay. Still breathing, he called to the team. "Let's move. Vet first." Dr. Tawanda, a seasoned wildlife vet with sharp hands and a calmer heart, knelt beside Ghost and leaned in. "He's stable, but weakening. We've got maybe an hour before the body starts shutting down." "Tranquilizer?" Ethan asked. "No, he's too weak. We keep him awake, keep him calm, pull him out clean." 2 rangers brought forward the rescue gear, a field crane designed for rhino traps, and a harness system with thick canvas straps and industrial ropes. It wasn't elegant, but it could lift 200 kilos straight up. As they set up the rigging, Ethan crawled a little closer and whispered down to Ghost. "You're going to feel it. It'll hurt, but you're getting out." Ghost didn't move, but his eye opened, barely. He blinked once. Then Aurora stepped forward again, approaching the edge of the crevice. A ranger reached for his tranquilizer gun. Ethan raised a hand. "Don't let her be." Aurora leaned over the rocks, close but not enough to fall, and let out a low, rolling growl. It vibrated through the stones. Ghost's ears twitched. Another growl, calmer now, like a heartbeat, steady, reassuring. Dr. Tawanda nodded. "She's keeping him from panicking. Keep her there." With the crane assembled and the harness lowered, the team went to work. Ethan and 2 others climbed down carefully, working in the narrow space to loop the straps beneath Ghost's body. He groaned once, sharply, when the canvas tightened around his injured leg. But Aurora's voice answered immediately, another low hum of calm. Ghost stilled. 1, 2, lift, Ethan called. The crane whined, metal straining as Ghost's body began to rise. Inch by inch, his limbs dragged against the rough stone. Fur tearing, blood smeared the rocks. But he moved, upward, out. When his body cleared the edge, the team surged forward, easing him onto a thick mat of blankets and moss. Dr. Tawanda rushed to stabilize his leg, quickly wrapping it in bandages and pressing gauze to the deeper cuts. Ghost's breathing was ragged but steady. He was out. He was alive. Aurora took a single step forward, Ethan turned, unsure, uncertain if she would interfere or attack in a surge of instinct. But she didn't. She simply lowered her head, pressed her nose gently to Ghost's shoulder, and stood beside him. Then she looked at Ethan. For a moment, neither moved. In that gaze was more than instinct. It was awareness. A silent exchange. You listened. You answered. You did not betray us. Ethan gave a quiet nod. We'll take care of him, he said. He'll make it. The stretcher team moved in, lifting Ghost gently and sliding him onto a wheeled platform. Aurora backed away, not with resistance, but acceptance. She watched them load him into the transport unit, watched the doors close, and only then did she step back to her pride. The rain had ended. The sky was soft now, the air warm and heavy with the scent of new life. And as the trucks rumbled away, carrying Ghost to a second chance, Aurora turned and led her lionesses back across the plain. She did not look back. She didn't need to. She had done what few lions would ever do. She had asked for help, and been heard. The rescue truck pulled into the Hwange Wildlife Center just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden streaks across the soaked plains. Inside, Ghost lay still, his white coat streaked with dried blood and mud, his breathing shallow but steady. The field team worked quickly, moving him into the medical enclosure, where he was immediately sedated and examined under floodlights. The diagnosis: fractured leg, bruised ribs, deep lacerations, painful, but recoverable. He would live, but he would need time. While Ghost slept through the first long night of healing, back near the cliffs, the lionesses waited. Aurora lay at the edge of the open field where the truck had disappeared. Her head lifted, ears twitching at every distant sound. Nala, Zuri, and Kaya circled restlessly nearby. They didn't hunt that night. They didn't move far. Every now and then, Aurora would let out a soft, low call into the dark, a sound not of summoning, but remembering. And then, something remarkable happened. The next morning, they walked, not toward prey, not in search of new territory. They walked toward the wildlife center. No one led them, no path marked their trail. But as the sun climbed and the air warmed, the lionesses appeared at the far edge of the center's protected perimeter, pacing the outer fence, silent, watchful, waiting. Ethan noticed them first. He was sitting near Ghost's enclosure, flipping through his notes and watching the pale lion sleep, when he caught movement in the distance. At first, he thought it was coincidence. Then he recognized them. Aurora stood front and center. The others flanked her, tails swaying gently, bodies calm. They didn't growl, didn't roar. They sat, and they stayed, every day, while Ghost slept, healed, and slowly regained his strength. The lionesses returned to the fence. Morning and evening, they came. Sometimes they sat for hours, unmoving. Sometimes they circled. Sometimes Aurora let out a low rumble, deep in her throat, when Ghost twitched or stirred. And Ghost heard, even when sedated, even through pain and sleep. His ears flicked when they called. His breathing quickened. His tail stirred. It wasn't the sound alone, it was the presence. The knowing. Ethan stood often at the fence, watching the strange reunion that hadn't yet happened, but was already real. It moved something in him. So he started writing. Not just logs, not just medical updates, but the story. He titled the folder The Lioness Call. And as Ghost recovered, stood again, walked again, growled softly when the wind returned to his fur. Ethan documented everything. He recorded how the pride never broke their vigil, how they did not behave like animals trained by instinct alone, how they chose to return, chose to wait, and most of all, how they had called for help. Not out of fear, but out of hope. Weeks passed. Ghost regained weight. The limp faded. His coat, though scarred, returned to its full pale glory. The final X-rays showed bone knitting. Tendons restored. He was ready. Ethan stood by as the center opened the gate. Ghost stepped forward slowly. For a moment, he paused, looked at the humans, the enclosure, the sky. Then he walked through. Aurora was already there, waiting. She rose the moment he appeared, but didn't charge forward. She waited. Ghost crossed the field, limping slightly, head lowered, and when they reached each other, neither roared. He pressed his forehead into hers, and she held still. The pride circled, brushing against him, sniffing, nuzzling. No resistance, no tension, only return. He was not a visitor. He was home. Ethan, standing with a camera slung over his shoulder, lowered it slowly. There were no words for what he was watching. Just truth. A bond beyond biology, beyond instinct, beyond species. Later, he submitted his report to conservation networks. Filed under outreach, medical, and behavioral research. But it wasn't the medical data that spread. It was his words. When the lionesses called to us, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of hope. They knew we could help. And for once, we listened. The story traveled across ranger posts, conservation centers, wildlife blogs, even newspapers. The lioness call, and with it, the final line that would be remembered for years. When lionesses call to man, it is not always a warning. Sometimes, it is a request, a bridge, a bond, because even the wild knows hope. Back in the wild, under a tree ringed by acacias, Ghost slept with his pride around him. Aurora kept her eyes on the horizon. And in the distance, beyond the trees, the wind shifted, but no one was alone.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.